Welcome to the TSF9 podcast, your weekly show about career transitions in an age of technology. I'm your host, Maurizio Raffona. In this episode, we talk about following a passion and going from a fun idea to a full-time career, and how important it is to take risks to put yourself in a position you love and enjoy. This week's guest, Chaya Topas, joins us from Maryland in the US. Chaya is a former communications director. She's a mother of three who one day decided to follow her real passion and became a children and tween book author. Chaya's story is something that I think resonates with many people. She graduated from college in her chosen field, had a job that ticked all the boxes, but in 40s felt a little lost, and that's when she decided to give writing a go. Since then, she's published 2 books with several more in the works. She's been featured on local television, websites, social media feeds, and has done many readings in schools. Hi, Chaya. Welcome to Tech Shift F9. It's great having you on the podcast. Thank you.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Well, first of all, congratulations on having the perseverance and drive to get to do what you probably want to do all along, and write for an audience that is so crucially important for society, young people. So I've read that you've been toying with the idea of writing a book for a while now, but how did you actually make it happen?
That's such a great question. I had wanted to write this book for a very long time because my husband and I kind of joked about it. And the running joke was that, whenever our kids are really driving us crazy and they're just not listening to anything we're asking them to do, we were choosing not to get angry and to make a joke out of it instead. And the joke was, one day when these kids are all grown up, we're going to visit them in their house and we're going to do all the crazy stuff that they do in our house in their house. So, like, we're going to eat with our mouth open at the table and let all the food just drop where it may, things like that. And then my husband had always said, you should write a book about that. And I always said, oh, yeah, I'll write a book about it. And then I was working as the director of communications for a small nonprofit, and I was feeling like incredibly unfulfilled and really unhappy with the work that I was doing. It wasn't that I was bad at my job, it was just I wasn't enjoying it. It didn't bring me any gratification. And one night, I was sitting at my laptop and I realized, hey, I've wanted to write this book for so long, and I actually, through this job, finally have the skills not to just write the book, but to illustrate it too. What if I actually did it? What if I did what I said I was going to do and actually write this book? And so I did, and it's been wonderful.
How did you go about mentally taking it perhaps from a side project or a fun thing to do into actually making it part of your career?
So that part was really hard because I was making a decent living as the director of communications. And when I wrote the book and I finally actually did it, I realized how much happier I was and how much more fulfilled and how I actually wanted to sit down on my laptop instead of the feeling where like I was dreading coming to sit down on my laptop every day. Writing the book made me feel really good about doing this work. And I thought to myself, this is what all those people were always talking about when they say that if you love your job, it doesn't feel like work. I was like, wow, I'm finally doing something and it doesn't feel like work. And, I had been so unhappy with that job that I finally just said to myself, let me give this a go. Let me see if I can make a career out of writing. And I just took that leap. And I'm very lucky because I have a supportive partner who's willing to fund this adventure of mine. But it's the first time that I've felt happy and fulfilled at work. And I needed to get in the headspace of realizing just how unhappy I was in order to find work and something in life that could bring me joy again.
That makes so much sense because I think it's easy to get stuck in our ways
Yeah.
and keep doing what we're doing just because we're a little bit afraid of taking risk. And it's great to hear you have an extremely supportive partner that can help you with that process. And I think what that leads me to ask is, did you always feel that writing was something you wanted to do? But it seems like it started more, as I said, as a joke. But did you have that talent in you, or did you develop it as you were actually starting to do this career?
So that's such an interesting question. I've been asked this before and I've thought about it a lot. And this is kind of how it came to be. Um, I never knew that I wanted to be a writer, but I wrote a lot for work as, in communications and in branding and marketing and product development, which are all the kind of career paths that I've had to write. And I've had to write well and creatively. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I always thought about writing books. I always had different ideas for books, but I never really embraced that I could be a writer. And it wasn't until this, joke and I actually wrote the book that I realized, oh, I could be a writer. And it's just exploded since then. So I already have a second book out and I have another four in the works. So it's just kind of, I guess, always been in me and I just wasn't able to access it.
It's great to hear that you've unleashed a waterfall of creativity.
Yeah.
And because we often hear about how important, even on this podcast with some other guests, how important it is to plan a new career, to line yourself up with the skills transfers. Um, but you're a case where you had the skills so long you probably didn't realize it, and you just took that upon yourself to put them into different use, which is wonderful to hear. Hi, this podcast, as you know, is focused a little bit on technology and career transitions, and I think book writing and writing in general is one of the many fields that, with the arrival of some new technology like generative artificial intelligence, we're potentially seeing a bit of a game-changing situation that could be quite disruptive to creatives like yourselves. Do you have
Mhm.
any thoughts on that?
I do. I am going to tell you that I do enjoy AI. And that for one of the books that I wrote, not any that are published yet, for one that I'm looking for a publisher, I used AI in order to generate images. And that was incredible. Like it was a really incredible experience because I'm paying, let's say, $10 for 1,000 images. I could never pay a human being to do that. And so, on one hand, it was wonderful for me as someone who can't afford to pay an illustrator. But then I look at it from an illustrator's point of view and I think to myself, how unfortunate is that? Somebody, many people are going to lose their jobs because this is so cheap and so easy. And so, I have very mixed feelings. On one hand, it's so beneficial for me, and on the other hand it's so disruptive and so frightening for people who are creative and who draw and who write, and what are they going to do now with this system that can just do it in seconds. So I have very mixed feelings about it.
Fair enough. I think that generally we'll need to have people that perhaps are focused on lower, I don't want to say lower quality work, but more run of the mill jobs, and approaches to having to raise their game a little bit. And I think there's always going to be a space for quality. There's always going to be a space for talent to shine through, but perhaps the ability to uh, produce very quickly a lot of drawings for the likes of yourselves, it makes more sense to do through a tool. But I was wondering, can I dig into that a little bit? I mean, what tool have you been using, if you don't mind sharing?
The tool that I've been using is called Dream Studio, and I actually did a lot of testing of the different AI platforms that generate images. And I tested five different ones, including Dolly and I don't remember the names of the other ones offhand, but I tested them all to kind of see if they could produce the kind of images that I was looking for. And Dream Studio, even though it's a pay for service, you really get closer to what you're asking for with less issues. So AI generated graphics have a lot of very strange issues, and they have them across the board. So every program I tested has these same strange irregularities. So, for instance, in all of these programs, when they are drawing a person, the eyes will not match up. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't, but often the eyes are irregular and one eye will be big and one will be small, or one will be closed, one will be opened, or one eye will be brown and the other will be blue. This is like super common and it's just must be something that they haven't figured out yet. And then AI has a really hard time with hands and arms. So you'll get hands with multiple fingers or not enough fingers or extra arms or extra hands. And it's just like totally bizarre. So it's something you kind of have to play around with and work on to try to get right.
Oh, totally. I mean, it sounds a little Picasso to me,
Yes.
in general, but I've recently been playing with Stable Diffusion.
Okay.
And what was interesting is you actually have to go and download different models
Hmm.
to optimize for photos. And what was actually very interesting for me is to try the same prompts across models that weren't optimized for those prompts. And
Okay.
the results were absolutely hilarious. And you
Yeah.
can see how a lot of people are worrying about AI and how it's going to take over things. But if scraping through the surface and digging into a little bit deeper, you can see that it's still such an early stage where you have to have such specialized tools to actually do anything that is decent, as you were saying, right? You had to
Right.
choose across so many. So I think we're still good for a little while.
A
Um,
little.
but I love how we delved into technology, but I want to bring it back a little bit to, I think, the core audience for your books, which are children.
Yeah.
And I'm a parent myself. I have three boys, and as parents, we always have this idea that technology is bad for our kids, whether they spend too much time looking at screens, they don't socialize in person enough, all that social media pushing stereotypes or wrong images to them, so forth and so forth. However, I cannot help but feel that our kids will grow up and work surrounded by technology by much more than we were
Right.
um, growing up. And so, in your experience raising children and young adults and actually writing for them, how do you see the role of technology and its use in their life?
I feel much the same way that you do. So I have three girls. They're 12, 10, and 6. And I'm a big proponent of limiting screen time. Like, as much as possible, my kids are allowed to watch a half hour of educational programming every day after they finish their homework. And I also allow 15 minutes of game time. So, game time could be playing chess against the computer or, any of the games that are not, I guess, war games. um, I allow, and I don't allow any social media for them whatsoever because, especially for girls, and I don't know how it is really for boys, but there's been so many articles written about how detrimental social media is specifically for girls and promoting body images that they can't find attainable. There's a lot of bullying, and that, social media for girls is really, really destructive. So I limit that completely. But like you said, I know that when they get into the workplace, they are going to have to, interact with technology. So along those lines, they do take, typing classes. And for school, they each have a laptop and they do their schoolwork on their laptop. And there's nothing I can really do about that. I know it's just necessary. And that's the way this world is progressing. So I fight it where I can fight it, and I just let it go where I know that I don't have control.
That's great insights. In terms of your book writing, when one thing I noticed is that as I'm growing up, particularly in the last few years, it's really hard to read a book. We're so used to having it on an iPad or snippets through um, just surfing on the web, rather than actually sit down with a physical book. But you're writing for young children, and you're sort of helping them appreciate reading and the patience that it goes with reading. But when you're putting, thinking ahead about writing a book, are you thinking about delivering it via different media, or for you it's still a physical book that needs to be, handled by a reader?
So I love paper books. I always will. You and I are of a generation of people who read paper books. And so I still love it. And I buy books for my own children pretty regularly, I would say. They have hundreds of books. And I wrote it to be a book for parents to read to their children. I think that reading to children is so vital to them learning how to read themselves, and it also creates such a warm sense of bonding. And so that's how they were intended. I also released my books as Kindle e-reader books. I know that, it's what I have to do. Certain people are only buying books that way, and so I did make them available in that medium. But my thought process going into, writing was that this would be a book, a physical book that a parent would read to a child.
No, that's great. And looking now a little bit about, again, you specifically in this career transition and how you've handled that. Once you write a book, that's really the beginning of the process in a sense, right? Then you have to go out and promote it. You have to go
Yeah.
and let people know about what you're writing about and what you care about. And how's that side of the business been? Or were you thinking, did you know that that was going to be your road ahead when you started this journey?
I did know that this was going to be part of the journey, specifically because I had researched getting published versus self-publishing. Now, I took the second route and I self-published 2 children's books. I have 4 that I've submitted to agents to be, brought to publishers. I don't know if I'll ever hear back from any of these agents. If you are an agent out there, please contact me. Um, so I knew that going into this, if I self-published, I was going to have to do all the promotion myself. And that's something that I have done. And it's the most time-consuming and the most difficult aspect of writing a book because the writing came very naturally and very easy and it was fun. And the promotion, you kind of feel like a rat on a wheel because you're constantly churning out content and putting everything you can out there, and there's very, very little response. I'm one person and I don't have a big following. So trying to get people to read and notice my book has been extremely difficult.
Well, I sympathize with that because this is something new for me as well on this podcast. And I'm trying to figure out ways to make sure people hear about it. Now, whether they listen to it or not, different story, but at least I would like it to be there as an option. I wonder whether that part of the business, so to say that you're going through the promotional side of it, as you just said, it's probably just as important as writing a good product or a good book in your case. But
Mhm.
how do you find the dealing with now a different industry altogether? I know you're in, experienced writer in a different context, but now I think you're having to deal with people that perhaps you didn't deal with before. And has that been a challenge for you to, essentially get to know perhaps a different type of peers?
It's definitely been challenging because it is brand new. I've never done anything like this before. Certain skills that I had from previous jobs, like you said, lend themselves to this. So I can write copy and I know how to make social media memes. And so that's helpful, but it's been very challenging because I haven't figured out how to reach a wider audience, or how to get people to respond to what I am writing. And that has been very difficult.
So if someone listening to this podcast were to ask you, Chaya, I'd like to quit what I'm doing and dedicate myself to something else. Based on your experience, what would you be advising them on?
I would say if you are truly unhappy with the work you're doing, you should go for it. Would I say jump in feet first the way I have? Not necessarily. If you have a supportive partner or if you've put away resources in order to fund that type of venture, absolutely go for it. If you do not have the resources or something to fall back on, I would say go slow. So if, like me, you want to write a book, write the book when you come home at night and try to get it out there. And once you've built a little bit more of a cushion around you, definitely, definitely try on something new because we only have this one life. And to be miserable every day going into work, it's not a life. And I absolutely promote doing something that you love.
Fabulous. And Chaya, looking ahead, again, it's very hypothetically speaking, uh, how has your experience in writing and launching your books prepared you to possibly consider another career pivot at some point?
Yeah, it has. I've thought a lot about getting into copywriting and copy editing and helping other people write books that, I have some new skills that I've learned that I could really, I think, help other people who are interested in this industry.
Fantastic. Chaya, thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it. If people want to find out more about you and buy your books, where can they do so?
So both of my current books are available on Amazon. You can search my name, Chaya Topaz, or you can search for the titles of the books. The first one is called When We Visit You, and the second one is called Go Away Bad Dreams. And then you can follow me on Instagram at Chaya Topaz. I'm also on LinkedIn, Chaya Topaz. I'm on Facebook, Chaya Topaz, and I'm on Twitter at Chaya Topaz. So I am very easy to search and find. It's spelled Chayatopas, and I'm always interested in meeting new people.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Chaya.
Thank you.
Well, this brings us to a close. I thank you all for listening. Stay cool, stay positive.